Pick up a can of sardines and flip it over to look at the back. You will see fish, olive oil, and salt. These three ingredients stay shelf-stable for years without a lab coat required to understand them. Now, if you grab a pack of deli turkey from that same grocery store, you are going to need a minute just to get through the list. We have reached a point where the processed food from 1955 actually has a shorter ingredient list than the fresh food sitting right next to it. Regulators are finally forcing the modern stuff to catch up. So today we are tracking 5 specific foods: Spam, sardines, pickles, canned peaches, and evaporated milk. We are asking a short question: did we actually make food better by adding more to it? Canning goes all the way back to the early 1800s when a French inventor named Nicolas Appert figured out a life-changing secret. He realized that if you sealed food in a container and applied enough heat, it simply stopped spoiling. While nobody fully understood why it worked, because germ theory was not mainstream yet, the military and explorers used the method constantly. The physics were incredibly simple, since you just had to kill what caused decay and cut off the oxygen. Because that was all they needed to stay safe, early canned goods kept their ingredient lists very short. That simplicity held steady for about a century, until the post-war food industry decided to go in a completely different direction. Starting in the late 1940s and accelerating through the 1960s and the 1970s, manufacturers began adding things that the original recipes never required. They used stabilizers to keep textures consistent across millions of units, and they added synthetic dyes so canned fruit looked vivid on a shelf instead of pale and honest. These companies were layering preservatives on top of preservation methods that already worked perfectly fine. The goal was not about safety, since the heat seal process had that covered, but instead they wanted uniformity and visual appeal across long supply chains. The real irony here is that the original canned goods did not have a problem that needed solving in the first place. A can of peaches from 1948 contained peaches, water, and sugar, and it sat in a pantry for 2 years without any issues at all. Everything added later was not about making the food last longer, but rather about making it look and feel a certain way to fit a retail standard. Consumers were trained to expect bright colors and firm textures that stayed consistent batch after batch. Every additive that went into these cans was solving a problem the older product never had, because the older product was not trying to be a marketing miracle. By the time the 1990s arrived, regulatory scrutiny started building quietly as people asked whether these solutions were creating brand new health problems. That pressure has been compounding ever since, and between 2024 and 2026, it finally broke through in a way the food industry could no longer ignore. In 2024, the Food and Drug Administration finally pulled the plug on brominated vegetable oil known as BVO. This stuff spent decades sitting in citrus sodas to keep the flavoring from floating to the top, but the government's new stance is pretty blunt. They no longer consider BVO safe because the evidence links it to toxic buildup in your body and potential damage to your organs. This ruling matters because of the signal it sends to the rest of the industry, proving that a chemical used for generations can vanish overnight once the conversation about food safety gets loud enough. The phase out of synthetic dyes is the next big domino to fall. By 2026, the Food and Drug Administration wants to wipe petroleum-based dyes like Red 40 and Yellow 5 off the map entirely, along with several others that have defined the look of processed food for years. These are the chemicals that make canned cherries look aggressively red and give store-brand pickles a shade of green you will never find in nature. Thousands of products depend on these colors to look appetizing, and many companies are finding out that without the dye, their food looks nothing like what you expect to see on a shelf. Red dye number 3 is actually facing its own specific deadline. The FDA announced they were revoking its use in early 2025, and we should see full enforcement by 2027. This move happened because of the Delaney Clause, a rule that bans any additive shown to cause cancer in animals, and that specific data has been sitting in a file since the 1990s. It took the FDA a long time to act on what they already knew, but the wheels are finally turning. Then you have California passing AB 418, which goes into effect in 2027 and bans potassium bromate, propylparaben, Red 3, and BVO at the state level. While this is a state law, the actual impact reaches way past the California border because food companies hate running 2 separate production lines for different regions. When California decides a chemical is done, manufacturers usually just reformulate for the whole country, making this law one of the most disruptive changes on the list. We also have to look at what is happening overseas, like the EU 2022 ban on titanium dioxide. This is a whitening agent found in everything from candy to coffee creamer, and it was pulled because of concerns that it could damage your DNA. Now, more than 15 states in the US are looking at similar bans through 2025 and 2026, which is putting even more pressure on the big food brands to clean up their acts. If you take out the synthetic dyes and pull the chemical preservatives, the ingredient list you are left with starts to look like something your grandmother would recognize. That is not an accident. When you strip away the laboratory shortcuts, you almost always end up back where food started. The 5 foods we are looking at today are perfect examples because they never really needed those extra chemicals to begin with. You have to start with Spam, mostly because it catches people off guard. It has a reputation for being mystery meat, but if you flip the can over, you will only see pork, water, salt, potato starch, sugar, and sodium nitrite. That is 6 ingredients total. If you go to the deli counter and check the label on a major brand of sliced turkey, you will find sodium phosphates, carrageenan, and flavoring compounds you cannot even identify. Spam actually has a shorter and simpler list than the so-called healthy deli meat, and that is a data point you cannot really ignore. Sardines are another easy win for a clean diet. Most cans contain nothing but fish, oil, and salt. The tinned fish category has exploded in popularity over the last 2 years, and it isn't just because people are feeling nostalgic for old-school snacks. Shoppers started reading labels more carefully, and sardines kept passing the test while other processed proteins failed. Because of the high omega-3 content, premium brands now use that 3-ingredient list as a major selling point, instead of trying to hide what is inside the tin. Pickles are interesting because they have split into 2 totally different products. The standard jars you see on the shelf use vinegar and calcium chloride for crunch, and they often use a yellow dye to keep that neon color. Fermented pickles use nothing but salt, water, and thyme to let the natural bacteria do the work. As the conversation around gut health went mainstream, more people started reaching for the fermented version, and the neon jars are getting much harder to justify when the plain ones do the same job. Canned peaches might be the most counterintuitive item on this list. While fresh fruit sounds like the cleaner choice, a peach in the produce section might be covered in wax treatments and post-harvest coatings that are hard to track. A sealed can usually has 3 words on the label: peaches, water, and sugar. You know exactly what you're getting, and the heat seal process used to preserve them has been a reliable method since the 1800s. Evaporated milk really shows the difference between chemistry and physics. To make it, you simply remove the water, apply heat, and seal the can. Compare that to a modern oat or almond milk, and you see an ingredient list full of gelin gum, sunflower lecithin, and various stabilizers, all there to keep the liquid from separating. Both products sit on the shelf at room temperature, but one got there through a simple physical process, while the other relies on a lab. People who started reading the side panels on plant milks often find themselves going back to a product that hasn't changed since the early 1900s. There is a simple test you can run the next time you're walking down the grocery aisle. Try reading the ingredient list out loud. If you can get through the whole thing in one breath and you recognize every word you said, you are looking at something relatively clean. If it sounds like you are reading a technical manual for a chemical plant that tells you everything you need to know about what is inside. The foods we lost over the decades weren't actually worse than what we have now. They just didn't need any fixing. These bans didn't cause the shift in our grocery aisles. They just confirmed what the ingredient labels were already showing us. If you find a product where a person from the 1950s could read every single word without getting stuck, you are probably on the right track. Subscribe for more deep dives into how our food changed and why we are finally starting to see the old ways come back.